But now, in File on 4, Felicity Hanna investigates the risks of some tax avoidance schemes that have been marketed to freelance workers, including NHS staff on the COVID front line.
So he says, I've not slept for more than 2 to 3 hours on any night, but it has given me a great many hours in which to desperately think of a way to pay tax I owe.
Thousands of people have been caught up in a controversial policy that means they now owe huge sums in backdated tax.
They're now getting these demands for money, which are literally destroying their lives. And, the consequences are terrible, so the human cost was enormous.
They were contractors and freelancers, and they were told they could keep more of their earnings.
Our clients will benefit from the peace of mind that appropriate taxes are paid away. Are you interested in taking home 85% of your current earnings?
Tens of thousands of people signed up to schemes like that, and it went on for years until HMRC took action and started asking for large amounts in backdated tax. One man who profited from schemes like this is multi-millionaire Doug Barrowman.
I've got 5 homes around the world, and this is certainly the biggest. Not bad for a rough-ass Scots git from Glasgow, really, but there you go.
This is the story of a decades-long dispute over what can be taxed and what can't. It's changed many lives. Some people have made fortunes along the way, while others now face financial ruin.
So if I just get some levels from you.
Okay.
What did you have for breakfast?
I had some fruit today, an apple and a banana.
We met our first guest in a hotel on the outskirts of the town where he lives. He seemed nervous, not about talking to us, more about talking about it at all.
I had a fair bit of travel while I was contracting, and in the airports where I was going, there was advertisements on billboards. These companies was coming up to where I was working at the time.
This is John. Well, that's not his real name, but he hasn't yet told his wife he owes 180 grand to HMRC. So he's agreed to speak to us, and we've agreed to call him John. Back in 2015, he was working as a contractor, meaning he had to sort out his own tax and national insurance payments. But there were plenty of companies telling workers like him that they could deal with all that admin for them.
Some of the guys who I was working with used a company called PCL, and I ended up going with PCL.
PCL offer a tax planning solution for self-employed contractors in the UK. We have in-house tax experts to ensure ongoing compliance. All your paperwork and tax calculations are taken care of for you, and you just send your timesheets to us and we'll do the rest.
So no more having to do all his own tax and paperwork, which had been a bit of a headache. Instead, a company called Principal Contracts Limited, or PCL, would manage it all for him.
I would pay them for services, and they would manage all tax, national insurance, etc. And they'd pay me a retainer payment and then a loan payment that they said was completely compliant and legal.
Our payment solution is endorsed by leading tax and employment opinions. It's time to start working smartly and join forces with PCL.
John had signed up to a company that diverted most of his pay to an offshore trust, which would then pay him money through a loan. There was almost no tax to pay on these loans, and he would not be expected to pay them back. It's been estimated that 50,000 workers signed up to similar schemes. It's worth mentioning that the number of self-employed workers has been rising in recent years as more people choose to work flexibly and for themselves. They can operate through limited companies that are more tax efficient, and John did just that. He worked through a limited company and paid himself largely through dividends. That's common for the kind of short-term contracts he was working in. By using loans, the PCL scheme went further.
Are you interested in taking home 85% of your current earnings?
It's easy to see why keeping 85% of your earnings might be tempting. So John was taking home 85%, then HMRC and PCL were getting a share of the rest. He was working hard and making good money. The next person in this story, Doug Barrowman, was also making good money. He's going to be a pretty central character to this tale, and he's also quite a character generally. He's a softly spoken Scotsman, usually pictured in a sharp suit and often by a fast car. He's in his 50s with grey hair, but he has the perfect teeth of a 20-year-old. And he's enjoying his success. Here he is appearing in the Channel 4 documentary Million Pound Mega Yachts, explaining why he bought his £20 million boat.
You have to spend it on something. There's a limit to how many houses you can have and private air travel, so therefore a lot of people come to the conclusion, I'm going to have one of these.
He's a self-made millionaire whose first business was a paintballing site outside Glasgow. He's also the founder and chairman of the Knox group of companies, headquartered in the Isle of Man. They're a group of businesses that deal in private equity, property and wealth management. But File on 4 has been investigating businesses linked to Doug Barrowman, which were also promoting the kind of tax schemes John signed up to.
Doug is actually one of the biggest business guys here in the country, and he's my inspiration as well.
That's Barrowman's fiancée, Baroness Michelle Moan, talking to the Bitcoin website Bits Online. Before COVID ruined everyone's plans, the couple were due to get married at a chapel in the Palace of Westminster. She's the entrepreneur who founded the international lingerie brand Ultimo, which she sold, and she has also done pretty well.
I was recently made a baroness by Her Majesty the Queen and the former Prime Minister.
Doug Barrowman made a fortune, and he spends one too. Here he is showing the TV crew around his yacht.
I think I'd have to say that everything you look at's expensive on this yacht.
But part of his fortune was made through businesses dealing with contractors like John, although that's not always obvious. So what is the link between Doug Barrowman and PCL, the company John signed up with? When we asked Mr. Barrowman about his connection to PCL, he said he's neither a shareholder nor a director. So to find out more, we need to travel, not on a yacht, unfortunately, but still across the water, to the Isle of Man. Here's our producer, Anna Meisel.
Hello, Felicity.
Anna, you've been looking into companies registry in the Isle of Man.
Yes, that's where I found the annual return for PCL from December 2015. John got involved with them in March of that year. And Doug Barrowman is right. He wasn't a direct shareholder in PCL. Back then, PCL was owned by a company called Knox Limited.
Knox does sound awfully similar to Doug Barrowman's Knox group of companies.
Right, and company records for Knox Limited for the same period show that he owned 100% of the issued shares of that company. But I'm afraid, Felicity, we actually need to continue our travels to the British Virgin Islands.
Oh, yeah. Virgin Islands, nice. So nice.
It is a shame the budget only stretches to sound effects and not plane tickets. OK, why are we off to the British Virgin Islands?
Because something very interesting happened in January 2020. PCL, that's the company John signed up with, submitted new amended annual returns for the previous years. Those returns no longer list Knox Limited as its shareholders, but instead it's a company registered in the British Virgin Islands. And BVI is one of the most obscure offshore jurisdictions. You can't actually find out who's behind the companies registered there.
No clues at all?
Well, the address given for the BVI company is Knox House, back in the Isle of Man. And John got involved with PCL before its ownership was retrospectively moved to the British Virgin Islands.
OK, this is complicated. It's difficult to see through the layers. It feels a bit like there's a mist on this tropical island.
Yes, it's very misty. And there's another layer. Please bear with me. When we asked Doug Barrowman about his ownership of Knox Limited, we received a letter from his lawyers. It says that while he is indeed registered as a shareholder, he's not actually the beneficial owner. Instead, they say, the sole purpose of this company is to act as a bare trustee corporate shareholder. That's perfectly lawful, but means that Mr. Barrowman is saying he holds these shares for the benefit of an unnamed third party. We can't find out who that is without the confidential trust documents.
Right. OK, well, that's where our travels appear to end, so let's get back to the UK, where John, along with thousands of other people, has not enjoyed the last few years quite as much as Barrowman has.
When did you first hear about the loan charge?
It was April 18. I had an email saying that potentially the way I was set up with PCL would be subject to the loan charge.
It's time to explain the loan charge. It's an enormously complicated bit of legislation, so here's a super simplified explanation. The government had progressively tried to crack down on tax avoidance schemes, first in the Finance Act of 2011, when it took steps to prevent employees being paid in loans, and then eventually applying the same rules to freelancers and contractors like John. But it also wanted to get back some of the taxes that had been lost to these schemes, and so brought in new rules. It allowed HMRC to add together any outstanding loans paid through a third party from the last 10 years and tax them as income all at once. This was the loan charge, and it's been controversial.
Stop the loan charge now! Stop the loan charge now!
Campaigners and many MPs argue it's a retrospective tax, and it's been the subject of fierce debates. Certainly its impact on workers like John has been considerable and time-consuming.
A nightmare, to be fair, 2.5 years of a nightmare.
What does HMRC say that you owe?
I now owe around £181,000.
£181,000. John still looks shocked repeating that number, even though he's had years to come to terms with it. After the loan charge, many of the companies involved closed, but the individual taxpayers couldn't simply walk away. They still had the loan charge to pay, and for some of them, the bills were staggering. It was a big shock for them and their families, although not all of them could bear to tell their families.
I've sort of kept it to myself. My family don't know about this, and I've often thought, is that the right decision? But when I think of what I've been through without any clear end game, I wouldn't want to put them through this. You know, I'm glad I made that decision.
How have you been concealing the pressure that you're under from your wife?
Difficult. A lot of time in the bath. Spending time on my own there, really, and just keeping it from her. It's tough. It's really tough. You know, I can't tell you the last time I slept.
It's easy to see the impact this has had on John. He looks tired. He's clearly distressed and exhausted by the last few years. But you could argue that the people who signed up to these schemes were trying to unfairly dodge tax, and that the loan charge is about putting that right. I put that to John.
That's not the case. I worked away on short sort of notice periods. It was more about the ease. I've regretted it for the last 2.5 years. I found out about it, but I did nothing illegal, and we've been made out to be criminals, and we're not. We're just normal people earning a living.
And the pressure on those normal people as they wait for a resolution can be overwhelming. Next, we're going to meet Gail. Her father had just retired when he was told by HMRC that they were looking into the scheme he had been in, this one with AML Tax Isle of Man Limited.
He was in his late 60s, a father to 3 and a grandfather to 7. He was an amazing grandfather. He genuinely enjoyed their company and days out, or even just sitting around, chatting with them, finding out what they'd been up to.
Like John, her dad wanted to shield his family from his worries. They knew there was some sort of tax issue, but for 2 years he never told them about the pressure he was feeling.
I had a call. We didn't know straight away that it was a suicide, so I just knew that he died, and that was a shock in itself. First I thought maybe it was a freak accident or something like that, but when they said that he'd been found in his letters, even to this day, I still in shock that he took his own life.
Gail kept the letters her father wrote. She shared part of them with us, and as you might expect, they're quite difficult to listen to.
So he says, I've not slept for more than 2 to 3 hours on any night. I say this not looking for sympathy, of course, because I deserve none. But it has given me a great many hours in which to desperately think of a way to pay tax I owe, and also to mitigate any of the effects of my illegal wrongdoings on my children. But of course it didn't matter how many hundreds of hours I churned these matters over in my head. It is what it is and cannot retrospectively be changed. And it was really brave for him to write it. There's pages, there's just of what he had gone through and how he felt about the shame, and that was the biggest thing, the shame and the stigma. He thought he'd broken the law and he was going to go to prison.
Of course, he hadn't broken the law. After his death, Gail was determined to settle her dad's tax bill, but when she finally had the number, that was another shock.
It was under 20,000. It just seemed like such a small amount for him to take his own life, and he could have paid it. That amount was just like putting a price on his life.
If you're wondering whether AML Tax Isle of Man Limited was connected to Doug Barrowman, then the answer is yes. He was a director at the time Gail's dad got involved. AML are initials that come up in a lot of companies associated with him. I asked Mary Aston, director of the Counter-Avoidance Directorate at HMRC, about the anguish felt by some of those people hit by the loan charge.
We have very dedicated colleagues who've worked really hard over this and seek to provide the best service possible. We have successfully supported thousands of people to settle, but I recognise we won't have got this right in every single case. So if somebody has concerns about the service they've had from HMRC, they can write to us about that. We review any complaint, take it seriously. We look at it independently from the people who were originally working with that taxpayer. So anyone who has concerns about their service should contact us. And where people have got big tax bills, we can give them as long as they need to pay what is legally due in a way that is manageable for them.
Gail's dad is one of 7 known suicides among those affected by the loan charge. The stress and trauma has hit some individuals hard. So hard, in fact, that the Loan Charge Action Group runs a helpline for people who feel overwhelmed or anxious. But there's been very little fallout for the people who made money from these tax schemes. Here's SNP MP Carol Monaghan speaking in Parliament in October 2019.
Carol Monaghan. Here.
7 needless deaths, 7 families tragically left to deal with the consequences. And yet the companies who have promoted these schemes, companies such as AML, are getting away scot-free. AML and its director, Doug Barrowman, appear to have moved away with no consequences whatsoever.
This was the reply to her from the Minister responsible for tax, Jessie Norman.
Well, I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to focus on the activity of the promoters. They are extremely ingenious in operating within the framework of law, but doing some very nasty and duplicitous things. They often operate offshore, and it's extremely difficult to close them down when they are constantly mutating from one company to another. But I can assure the House that we are looking at this problem extremely closely, and I hope to return to the House at some point fairly soon with some thoughts.
Here's Gail again.
There doesn't seem to be any consequences for promoters. And Doug Barrowman, who was due to get married in Westminster Chapel this year, I just feel like he's protected. And there's no protection for these tens of thousands of victims, whereas, you know, someone like Doug Barrowman can just walk away unscathed.
Mr. Barrowman declined to be interviewed for this programme. However, we did receive a statement from a spokesperson. They said the arrangements with AML had been notified to HMRC under the disclosure of tax avoidance schemes, so that there was full transparency. All the relevant taxpayers were aware of that, and once the rules changed in 2011, AML stopped any activity relating to employee schemes with third-party payments. After the 2017 loan charge rule changes, they stopped all self-employed schemes too, and provided assistance to contractors. They also say that customers were warned of the risks when they signed up, and that the conduct of AML has been lawful at all times. Doug Barrowman's fiancée, Michelle Moan, has also publicly defended him. Here she is talking to CNBC about AML back in 2017.
When legislation changed, they stopped doing it. So nothing was illegal, nothing was untoward. He is an amazing guy, very charitable, and a very successful business guy.
No one can deny that Doug Barrowman is a very successful business guy. He's made a fortune from fees paid by people like John and Gail's dad, and unlike them, he's not suffered any of the fallout. It's a fact that angers many of the individuals left to settle big bills with HMRC.
It's really frustrating. You know, they've took whatever money they made and they've just left me, and it's up to us. It does make me skin crawl, if I'm honest.
It's not just the individuals caught up in the loan charge who want more to be done about the businesses that promoted the schemes. MPs, campaigners and even an independent review into the loan charge carried out by Sir Amias Morse have all called for more action. Even some of the payroll firms who operate in this sector have asked why HMRC doesn't simply collect payroll taxes from big companies if they want to tax them as employees, rather than resorting to mechanisms like the loan charge. Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, the former leader of the Conservative Party, is one of many MPs who've been contacted by constituents after they realised they would be subject to the loan charge.
I think the HMRC goes after the wrong target because it's the easy target. The easy target to go after is those as individuals who are involved in it. But they've not really gone after the promoters. And I was aware of this rather ludicrous statement made, if you don't mind me saying so, by the Minister, Jessie Norman, who said that the government couldn't go after the promoters.
He's referring there to this comment made by the Minister to BBC News back in July last year.
The difficulty is that unless they've done something that's actually illegal, it is very hard, and of course we're not seeking in any case to pass retrospective legislation that would allow us to go after those promoters.
But that's exactly what they've done for ordinary people. They've gone after them. They've just gone after the people that were, ordinary business people and families, often, not on major incomes, who thought they were doing something which was quite right.
We asked the Treasury about criticisms that the loan charge was retrospective and unfair. A government spokesperson told us,
"The loan charge was introduced to ensure those who use disguised remuneration schemes to pay themselves income through loans, often via offshore trusts, contributed their fair share of tax. It's right that we continue to tackle these types of schemes."
So we've looked at the loan schemes and how they were tackled, but it's also worth looking at how the original schemes adapted as the laws were updated. Let's go back to John. He had signed up with PCL in spring 2015, and in autumn 2016, they got in touch to say they were moving him to a new company. He didn't question it at the time, but now he wonders whether in fact this was to get around the looming loan charge. The new company paid the loans to him directly rather than through a trust. He says he was later told that the direct loans are not captured under the loan charge, so he didn't need to tell HMRC about them. But he's worried that one day HMRC might ask for backdated tax on these loans too. It's a question that makes him very uneasy.
I specifically asked them if the loans needed declaring, and they have on email where they say they don't need declaring.
But you were still concerned?
Yes, obviously my immediate thought was, what's to stop another retrospective legislation coming in that will capture direct loans in this?
A spokesperson for the company concerned told us that direct loans from an employer which have not been assigned to a third party are not subject to the 2019 loan charge, and that there is no requirement to disclose them to HMRC. More broadly, HMRC's Mary Aston says changes in the law around disclosure of schemes brought in the last 5 years have made it more challenging for promoters of tax avoidance. And the government has just finished consulting on how to strengthen those powers further.
They're a very determined crowd, the people who are remaining promoting tax avoidance, but fortunately we are equally determined in tackling them. To give you an idea of other ways this can work out, though, just the fact that the government brought in additional powers for HMRC to tackle promoters of avoidance led to something like 20 promoters leaving this market altogether, and some of those were promoting disguised remuneration as well, and they packed up because they realised that the risk to them had increased significantly.
In 2018, John was reeling from the news of the loan charge and desperate for help. He was told he could contact Vanquish Options. It seemed they had a solution that would make his 180 grand tax bill simply go away.
I was desperate. I contacted Vanquish and we started the discussions. Basically, they were saying for a 5% fee of the total loans, they would get rid of this loan charge.
They claimed he could repay the loans through them for just 5% of their original value, much less than the loan charge would be. The solution they came up with sounds incredible. And although they wanted a way out, lots of people were worried about what Vanquish claimed it could do. One was concerned enough to record his conversation with Vanquish, which has been shared with us.
Good morning, Jamie calling from Vanquish. You okay? The first thing you undertake, once you sign all the documentation.
Jamie explained and explained and explained, and it all sounded pretty confusing. He said that the entity which held this worker's loans would split them into 5% and 95%. The worker could then pay the 5%, bringing his balance to zero. That 5% is then invested into a third-party investment company, which also takes on liability for the remaining 95% loan. It wouldn't be written off because that would trigger a tax charge, but the worker would no longer be associated with the loans and so wouldn't pay the loan charge. Totally clear, right? Anyway, so far he hadn't convinced his potential customer, who wanted to know more about the investment company that would be involved. But Jamie said he didn't know, and there was a reason for that.
Because as soon as we know and we start getting quizzed by HMRC, that's when we can let details slip, which is kind of the opposite of what we want to do.
Jamie also said he would send through more information by email because it wasn't available online.
Now, the reason we're not all singing, all dancing online is because if we were, then it would be relatively easy to sort of track us down, if you follow me, on the side of people that really want to inquire as to what we're doing with regards to the 2019 loan charge. So that wouldn't really be beneficial for us. In some sort of capacity, I suppose you could say it's somewhat shady in that sense, but for what we are doing, it kind of has to be.
We asked HMRC about Vanquish, and they couldn't comment on individual companies, but they told us that they are aware of a number of schemes that promised a workaround the loan charge. So far, they say, none of them have been successful. So John steered clear of Vanquish options and was right not to trust that they could make all his problems vanish for a fee.
It just felt there was just attacking desperate people asking for more money, and I don't know how many signed up with Vanquish options and what trouble they're in, but I don't doubt for a second that HMRC won't accept that. I just feel like they preyed further on vulnerable victims.
So who is behind Vanquish options? We did a bit more digging. I'm looking at this document that John was asked to sign by Vanquish. It has a Vanquish Options logo, but here in the small print it says Option 365 Limited with an address in Malta. So if I go to the Malta Business Registry and buy its annual return from March 2019, this document says Option 365 was owned at the time by Knox Limited, and as we already know from earlier on, that company is owned by a very familiar name, Doug Barrowman. Here's what his spokesperson said.
Options 365 was established to assist contractors that had fallen foul of the retrospective loan charge. It provided an outsourced administration service for a nominal fee, collating information for individuals who were reviewing their options.
Doug Barrowman's lawyers tell us that neither he nor Knox have at any time owned or controlled Vanquish. They also say the shares held by Knox are held for the benefit of third parties, though they haven't said who they are. So we've looked at a number of businesses with lines connecting them to Doug Barrowman, some making money selling loan schemes and another making money promising a way out of the resulting tax bills. But it doesn't end there. File on 4 has discovered something more.
The government calls on retired doctors and nurses to come back to work and help fight the coronavirus outbreak.
We're saying to anybody who has had a recent qualification and has let that qualification lapse, it is a doctor, as a nurse, to come back to the NHS. Your NHS needs you.
At the height of the pandemic, frontline health workers responded to the government's plea, only for some to be targeted by yet more salespeople offering payment solutions. So now we need to add yet another new company name to the list as we meet Contracting Wise Limited. What you're hearing there is their very professional promotional video. And if you look at its website, it all looks very professional too. It provides a number of services to contractors, including acting as a broker to set them up with payroll companies. I spoke to Paul at Contracting Wise, posing as a would-be NHS worker.
Hello, Paul speaking. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thanks.
They had been specifically targeting workers like this with a £150 sign-up incentive at the start of the pandemic. But I was offered far more than just payroll services. I recorded my call, but as you'll hear, the line wasn't great, so we've asked an actor to read the transcript.
We're responsible for getting you the best deal.
So we're responsible for getting you the best deal, getting you through the sign-up process, getting you on board. And then once you're at that point, we then pass you on to the umbrella company.
I told Paul I was an occupational therapist who was looking at jobs that would pay me around £850 a week, just over 40 grand a year. He told me the payroll companies he could hook me up with would help me get a higher return by splitting my earnings up. For example, £400 of what I earn could be paid as normal taxed salary, and the rest would be paid through what he called an employee advance.
And the reason why they do that as the employee advance is not a taxable income.
And the reason why they do that is because an employee advance is not a taxable income. It's only the first part which is classed as your taxable income. So they're allowed to send the remaining sums to you without taking any further tax deductions, without reporting that on your payslip, because that's the legislation by HMRC. An employee advance is not a taxable income.
An employee advance is not a taxable income.
If you can't keep up with all the new names, then don't panic. Here's one you'll probably remember by now. Doug Barrowman. Mr. Barrowman says he is not a director of Contracting Wise. That's correct. And he has no involvement in the company. That depends what you mean by involvement. Contracting Wise is registered in the Isle of Man, and the latest available annual return for the company in 2019 shows that its shares were fully owned by Knox Limited. And as we've already heard, Knox Limited's latest return, dated 2020, records it belonging to, no drumroll needed, Doug Barrowman. So this is yet another company with shares owned by Knox, whose own shares are held by Doug Barrowman. Again, his lawyers point out that Knox only holds any shares for the benefit of third parties. So while Doug Barrowman is the registered shareholder of Knox, he isn't a beneficial owner of the company. I took a transcript of that call to Keith Gordon. He's a barrister at Temple Tax Chambers. Maybe he would tell me this is all absolutely normal.
I was absolutely gobsmacked by what I saw in that transcript.
Maybe not.
What you were told was that if you'd earned £850, which ordinarily you'd have to pay tax, national insurance on as you earned it, that by waving a magic wand, £400 of that would be taxed as normal, but £450 of it will be treated as if it's not salary. And simply by saying it's not salary, Paul was telling you, you don't have to pay tax on it. The most generous way of describing it is naive. Just simply by renaming part of your payment, they think that you can do away with the tax bill. Well, tax is complicated, and believe me, you can't simply do away with the tax bill by just pretending something is something else.
Tax barrister David Pett, the man who literally wrote the book on all this, Disguised Remuneration and the Loan Charge, says this is even more problematic than the loan schemes that got so many people into difficulties.
What is being asserted here is that black is white, that what we're paying you, in part, is not an amount of earnings, taxable earnings, it's something else. That is simply not correct.
We asked Contracting Wise whether these schemes could leave taxpayers open to challenges and bills from HMRC in the future. A spokesperson said, "Our aim is to assist the contractor with the best support for their circumstances," but added Contracting Wise is not a scheme provider and therefore cannot offer any comment relating to questions around how the scheme works in practice. However, they did say they will conduct an internal investigation to address any remarks that may place its clients at risk. When we contacted Doug Barrowman to ask about the schemes, a tax specialist at Knox Group plc said that the arrangements follow tax legislation and that loans or advances from your employer are not taxable income. I'm looking at a section of the government website about tax avoidance, and I can see that back in March, HMRC specifically said workers returning to the NHS should be careful because there were unscrupulous promoters of tax avoidance schemes targeting them. And if I scroll down, there's quite a lot more information on the site. It says a common feature of these schemes is that they promise two separate payments, one declared as earnings and another one that they would describe as not taxable. And the website says these schemes are very likely to involve tax avoidance, and you could end up owing tax and interest as well as incurring the fees paid. HMRC's Mary Aston had a warning for anyone considering signing up to any schemes that promise low taxes and high returns.
The main message is, if it sounds too good to be true, it almost certainly is. And somebody telling you that part of your income can come as a loan and that you can keep it forever, but you won't have to pay any tax on it, that is too good to be true.
What I wanted to understand is why, if it's so easy for a worker to find a scheme that's too good to be true, HMRC can't also find them and stop them.
We are very actively tackling them, and I have a very committed team of investigators who will tackle them. Equally, the people who are left promoting tax avoidance are equally determined to stay there. So the sorts of things they do, as we get close, they will collapse their company and set up a new one, and that sets us back and we have to start again. As we get close, they may move offshore. That doesn't put them out of our reach, but it makes it harder and it slows things down. And that is why the government is consulting on further provisions to tighten up our powers so that we can move faster in future.
The loan charge and its fallout is almost endlessly controversial. And now the government is looking at strengthening powers in the future to stop schemes earlier, before taxpayers end up with substantial debts to HMRC. But that's a small consolation for John, who is right now considering bankruptcy as the only way out.
Would you tell your wife at that point?
Yes, I guess at that point I've got a plan, even though it'll be difficult. It's a bittersweet one, really. If I get the closure I need, it'll be relief. It'll be relief because I don't know how much longer I can keep doing what I'm doing and you know, keep the fight up, I guess. So I'll be gutted because I've worked hard, but the only person getting hit with it is me. You know, there's no liability whatsoever with these promoters, and everybody knows who they are, but it's the small people who are getting destroyed.
Tonight's programme was produced by Anna Meisel, the editor was Gail Champion, and if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in tonight's programme, you can find a list of organisations who may be able to offer help and advice at bbc.co.uk/actionline.